In such times, if I were to build a stock related portfolio, I'm just picking a random number of 10 lakhs. How should I build that portfolio?
Never have 100% of your portfolio in equities.
How are you seeing US stock markets right now? Do you think these are good entry points?
Global doesn't mean just the US.
How do I find out good stocks?
A good portion of your picks are not going to do what you expected.
Where are you sitting when it comes to SIPs?
Investing is a loser's game. When you're panicking, that's when you need to remain in the market.
Hi friends, my name is Rahul Jain. I'm a SEBI registered research analyst, and today's guest is none other than Devina Mehra ji. I've done a podcast with Devina ji earlier, and Devina ji does not need any introductions whatsoever, but I can tell you that she's one of those chairpersons that started global investing back in, if I remember, 20 years, 25 years back. And she's a chief investment strategist for First Global. More than 30 years of experience of global investing, not just India. So I'm stressing on global investing. She understands macros and a lot more that goes behind investing. Very, very honored to have you, Devina ji, today. And thank you so much for giving me your time.
Thank you for having me again, Rahul.
Thank you. Devina ji, there is a lot going on. If we look at general economy, geopolitical situations, stock markets, war, Trump, FI is leaving, rupee falling, so much of chaos, if I put that as a one word to summarize everything. In such times, if I were to build a portfolio, let's say I'm just picking a random number of 10 lakhs, and this portfolio is stock related portfolio, how would you tell me to go about approaching that portfolio? How should I build that portfolio? What are the factors that I need to look into from a value versus growth, allocation perspective, market cap, sectors? I just wanted to get broad view on how do I go about building that portfolio, please?
So, you are right. It's been a very noisy time, if I may use the word, and probably even more than any other geopolitical event. From the time this war started a few weeks ago, it's been less than 2 months. And literally every 2 days, sometimes every 2 hours, the news changes. Ceasefire, no ceasefire, straits open, straight closed. We fight till the end. We are talking every day it changes. Of course, you've seen a lot of people, lot of trades which take just the right view just before an announcement, but that's another story. So coming back to somebody, an investor looking at where to invest, first of all, a lot of this noise should be forgotten in some senses, because if you look at a very long term perspective, if you look at whenever you look at charts which are 20, 30, 40 years, it's very clear, okay, if the market fell here, I wouldn't have sold. I would have kept it and so on. But actually, when you are living in the moment, because you see only that down of the graph, you don't see the up move. You are frozen, you are scared, you're panicking. All of that happens. But this is a study we did just before the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, when the tensions were building up at the border there. And we looked at about 50, 55 years of data, every geopolitical upheaval, the two Gulf Wars, US bombing Libya, 9/11, etc., etc. And the trend was very clear that the markets forget about it pretty soon. So on the day the war broke out, I actually made a video saying that do not react too much to this. And it was not a statistical exercise. It was in every single case. And more recently, Financial Times had an analysis which went back to the beginning of the 20th century. So, over a century, about 125 years or so, you can say, which included the two world wars also. And again, the conclusion was the same: don't react to geopolitics. So even in the two world wars, the only investors who suffered were those of the countries that were in the war and that were defeated, like Germany and Japan in that case. Otherwise, there's no point reacting too much to what's happening in the markets. So step back and you said stock oriented portfolio, but I would just like to also say that never have 100% of your portfolio in equities. I'm an equities person. I mean, that's my bread and butter, but I still always say that. Sometimes people say I'm 25 and in a good job. Should I be 100% in equity? I say never be 100% in equity, because equity should be money you don't require to take out for any reason, at least in the next 7 to 10 years. And even if you're in a good job, you might decide to study further, you might lose your job, there might be a medical emergency, you might be buying a house. There are all kinds of reasons why you might need money. In fact, the two worst pieces of financial advice, which are fairly common, is be 100% in equity when you are young and be 0% in equity when you retire. Because in today's day and age, if you're retiring at 58 or 60, you have to plan for another 30 plus years. It's almost as long as your working life. So again, you will not keep up with inflation if you are in 100% safe assets at retirement. For most people, that would be the case. So coming back to your question of what to do. So first of all, as I said, don't be 100% in equity. How much you have in equity and otherwise depends on when you need the money. If your children are going to college 4 years later, it will be a different profile from if they are going to college 15 years later, or whatever is your financial goal. So have some reasonable number in fixed income, it's safe fixed income, which you can withdraw if you need. As far as the equity part is concerned, logically, you should have a lot more in global portfolios, because India is less than 5% of the world's market cap. So there is no reason why 90, 80, 100% of your investment should be here. Logically, it should be more, but at least work towards, let us say, at least a 30, 40% of your portfolio in global investing. I mean, I have 80%. And that's at least the logical thing to do. But build towards that, have a little bit of gold and silver, not too much. I mean, usually it should be single digit. That's the broad allocation. And this, the fact that global investing is so important is something, I mean, recently people have started talking about it simply because India has not done well for the last year, year and a half. It is not a well thought out call. I mean, last time people were talking about global investing was in 2021, when a number of NASDAQ ETFs and fund of funds were launched. And then in 2022, NASDAQ was the worst performing, almost the worst performing index in the world. And then people who had bought that NASDAQ ETF were saying, should I sell? Now it's 40% down. So I said, don't sell now. I mean, you don't compound a bad buy with a bad sell. So, so that's what happens, that often you enter a category or an asset class or a country or a sector when it has done well off late, which may not be the greatest point to enter. But as a broad allocation, not just sitting today, but overall, as I said, at least 40% should over time move to global investing. And because it's a cause for me, and because global doesn't mean just the US, this is the other misconception. People think global means US. And one of the reasons why I also, I mean, this is a number I've given in many interviews, that when I started working, the dollar was 12 rupees. So when you are budgeting for a goal which is 20, 30 years hence, you cannot forget that the rupee depreciates. I mean, I have seen it depreciate 90% just in the source of my career, let alone course of my career, let alone my lifetime. So that's the part. And as I said, since it's a cause for me, we have an investment product that starts at $10,000, which invests in all countries of the globe, all asset classes, which was, that 10,000 rupee, $10,000 was 7.5 lakh rupees not very long back. It's now become 9 lakhs. So maybe, instead of 10 lakhs, if your starting point is 15 lakhs, it may be easier to get that. But, that's, and normally, I mean, that kind of product was not available in the market for less than $1 million. So that's why, I mean, we try to bring it down as much as possible and make it accessible. And along with that, I would also add a warning note that I see a lot of global products being launched just now, especially via the Gift City route. And most of them are by people who have no experience in global markets. They might be saying we are global experts, but that's not their that's not the track record. You mentioned our going global. Yes, we went global in 1999, as far back as that. And we were not just the first Indian, we were the first Asian members of the London Stock Exchange, other than the Japanese in 1999 and NASDAQ a little over a year later. So, and Aviat didn't even have a category in our business to make an overseas subsidiary. So we had to make a special application because nobody in financial services, other than banks setting up branches, nobody had gone overseas. So it was like really the Wild West in a sense. So, but those are complex companies, those are complex economies. It takes a long time to really understand what's going on there.
This is very, very useful, Devina ji. And I think the point that you talked about, that taking the structural stance about moving your portfolio to global, that is irrespective of how the current markets are behaving. Just because India is not performing right now, and then you decide, okay, our India is not performing, US is performing, let me shift it. I mean, tomorrow it's entirely possible that US might come down, right? I mean, there's no guarantee. So you're saying this is a more a mindset versus, as well as the structural change that one needs to bring in their portfolios, and not heavily relying on just one Indian stock market, which a lot of retail investors, including me, have been doing for a number of years. The time has come to realize that, look, rupee is depreciating, right? There's no denying, it's a fact. But I want to ask you one thing around US stock market specifically. US stock market is continuously going up, right? As if there is no tomorrow. It's just going up. There are concerns that people have, be it the debt or be it what Trump is doing to, I don't know, they have their views, right? Positive and negatives. How are you seeing US stock markets right now when they have hit all-time high? Do you think these are good entry points, or there is a caution that people need to, exercise at this point in time?
So first of all, you started by that if I want to get out of India, I must buy the US. So let me repeat, I said it in, I think, the answer to the previous question also, that US is not the world.
Yeah.
So do not think that, if you just invest in India and US, it's better than investing only in India, but only little better. US may be the largest market in the world, but it is not the only market in the world. And people think that world markets always follow the US. That's not always the case. I mean, there are long periods when US underperforms. People forget that 2000 high of the Nasdaq, and after that the tech crash came. That high of the Nasdaq was not crossed for 15 long years. In between, there was even a period that 2003 to 2007, where US was not coming off a high. It was already down. It still did nothing much for 5 years. I think over 5 years, it gave some 60% or 65% growth. Whereas the emerging market index went up 3.5, 4 times. India went up 6 times. Brazil went up 10 times. So one thing is certain in markets, that themes change, whether it is countries, whether it is sectors, whether it is even investing styles, value, growth, consumer stocks, small cap, all themes come and go. And that 2003 to 2007 period, when the emerging markets were doing so well, the stories always followed. And the story became that the US is over as a power. And that's when BRICS was coined, that now it's the whole baton has passed on to a different set of countries. And then the US market started doing well again for, let's say roughly from 2010 onwards. And therefore, everybody forgot about all this. So these are all stories. So that's why I'm saying global doesn't mean just the US. So just to give you a perspective, in our global funds and portfolios, we've been underweight the US since beginning of 2025. This year, again, we cut it a little more. I mean, obviously, it's still the largest weight, but it is now much less than the benchmark. So like this year, in February, I mean, we weren't making any call that geopolitical conflict was breaking out, but it just appeared to us that crude was due for a rally. So we cut US further and put that money in commodities, so oil and metals, both not precious metals, but industrial and rare metals. So that minerals. So that is roughly so you always have to change the strategy. So last year they said we cut US, we increased Europe. China, we had been overweight from 24 itself. So both those bets worked out. And we are talking, of course, of the currency also. We are only talking versus the US dollar. US dollar off late has rallied, but uh, from 25 beginning, more or less, it was declining against most other currencies. So, I mean, even see now for Indians, often the lot of the costs have become more hard currency, that more children go abroad to study, and people after retirement also, because the kids are there, will say, "Ah, we'll spend half the year there or whatever." So that you have more hard currency expenses, and all the people who thought that US is not so welcoming anymore and we should move to probably for college to Europe. Now, in just 2025, your college bill went up 20% because the rupee depreciated against the euro by 20%. So we are only looking versus the dollar. But against most other currencies, the rupee depreciated even more. So those are not things you can forget, because as I said, you're not planning for 2 years, you're planning for 20, 30, 40 years. So all those things you have to take into account, and US is not the globe. And while you are saying the US market has been rallying, the composition has changed. So if you look at last 3 calendar years, it was driven by tech, and that too basically mostly 7 companies. That what they call the Magnificent Seven in technology. So in 2023, more than 60% of the S&P, not the Nasdaq, I'm talking the S&P move was these 7 companies. In 2024, it was more than 50%. In 25, it was more than 40%, but the bull was tiring. Actually, only Google and Nvidia outperformed. All the other 5 underperformed the S&P even in 25. And in 26, if you see, last I saw, which may be a few days ago, while the S&P is up some 4-5%, the Russell 2000, which is like the broader index in the US, that was up some 25% plus. So now it is the tech companies are not doing so well. The rally is actually going to the more of the old economy companies, you can say. So very often when in Indian newspapers, I see all this that, oh, India is not doing well because we don't have an AI play, or if you want to sound even fancier, you say India doesn't have an innovation story. You are not, cognizant of the fact that that bull is actually tiring elsewhere. So you can't drive looking backwards. So
Right.
that's the essential thing, that each time, and this we actually tested it out, that if you systematically invest in whatever has done the best in the last period, let us say the last year, you will equally systematically underperform.
Right.
That's the data. So you can't, which is the natural instinct. This is what happened in January. The inflows into the gold, the ETFs and funds in India were more than what they were in equity. If you go back last year, March, April, it was hugging the zero line. So why was everybody rushing into gold? Because gold did well in 2025. But then, all the people who bought in January are sitting on losses, at least in dollar terms. So that's the nature of the beast. Please do not chase what has done well of late, which is the natural instinct.
Right.
And
Right.
because people are so negative on India just now, and even fellow fund managers who always sold, quote unquote, the India growth story are now telling you that these are the risks. I think that in probability terms shows that India will probably do better now than it did in the last year and a half. Because that's, again, this is not my opinion, this is data, that sentiment is a contraindicator. When you are panicking and when you want to get out of a certain market, usually the next period returns are above normal. It is when you're feeling extra buoyant that it's so easy to make money is when you should pause.
Yeah, yeah. No, very well said, actually. And so that brings us back to Indian stock market. So given the fact that last couple of years, there is not much happening in Indian stock market from an investor's cheering perspective, uh, are you, so you said for, specifically on US stock market, you said we have sort of been underweight now recently, right?
Yeah.
Because of the rallies, etc. Where do you stand in terms of Indian stock market, and where are the opportunities that your PMS is looking when it comes to Indian stock market?
Okay, so we are in the middle of a rebalance, because we normally rebalance once a quarter, so it might change a bit. But last 2 years, we have been overweight auto components and later auto also. Pharma healthcare is another area where we have been overweight. banks we have not been overall overweight, but from 25 beginning, we increased, especially in PSU banks. So that was the pattern that we saw. But our portfolio is quite diversified. So we will have picks even in, let's say, capital goods or FMCG or chemicals. Uh, and I will never tell you that this sector will do well for, 3 years or 5 years, because that crystal ball nobody has. So we always look at our portfolio from base zero every quarter. That today, if I had cash, where would I be invested? That's the question I ask. And that's where we really start from. So of course, it's not as if every quarter the whole portfolio changes. Normally, 85-90% of the portfolio remains the same, but that's the right question to ask.
Right,
That
right,
sometimes things do change.
right. You
Sometimes
said
data
you said within banks, you were leaning towards PSU banks, and I have heard that a lot. Have read a lot of articles about it as well. Any specific rationale on PSU banks versus private banks?
So, I mean, if you look at most data points, whether it is NPA, whether you are looking at, especially the incremental growth, whether it is in CASA deposits or credit growth, and all that has been improving. The valuation started out, of course, now they are a little more in sync, but they started out very, very low valuation compared to most of the private sector banks. And so, in many areas, their market share is actually going up. And as I said, that they have cleaned up the balance sheet. So that's on the balance. There's still, and if you look at last 2.5 years, there's a whole very big difference between the returns from PSU banks and the returns from the larger private sector banks. It's like a big gap and different directions altogether. So it's not. I'm not saying that there's like that you should put all your money in banks. I'm always a very nervous investor in banks because you don't know where the negative surprises are hiding. And in the last 1 year, of course, there have been like kind of three negative surprises, but it all came from three different public sector banks. So whether it's a credit book or the sorry from the private sector banks. So whether it's a credit book or the trading book, there have been three surprises, and all from private sector banks. But this is the nature of banking, that it is a highly leveraged business. So even a 5-7% hit on the asset is a very big hit on your capital. And also, as I said, as an outsider, you don't know where the problems are hiding. And there's no scope, really speaking, of a big positive surprise, because you don't participate in the upside of a lender. If a company you lend to does very well, you don't get anything extra as a bank. If anything, the company will say, reduce my interest rate.
Yeah.
So it's structurally a business of negative surprises. It's
Right.
just the way it is, and I've been a banker, I've been a credit analyst for a bank. I know how banking works.
Right, right. No, I think that's fair observation, that banks are lending and all they're getting is 8, 9, 10, 12, whatever percentage of interest rates, and that's the maximum upside. So there is a cap to the upside, is what you're trying to basically say.
Yeah, and also it's a leverage business. I mean, if I simplify it or not, you put in 10 rupees of capital and you borrow 9 rupees from deposits, and then you are lending out 100. I mean, obviously it's not as simple, but I'm just saying. So if out of that 100, 10 goes back, that's your entire capital getting wiped out. So it's inherently a leverage business. So that's the other thing.
Yeah, yeah. Totally get it. Coming back to stock picking then, Devinaji, just wanted to get your, 30, 40 years of wisdom in terms of quality of stock selection or rejection, either ways, right? So let's say, even if we go very agnostic to sector, because it's extremely hard to say this sector is likely to do well or not, either ways, right? It's extremely hard to say that. There are people who are able to write the sectors, etc. But when it comes to picking the stocks, and I'm talking about bottoms up, right? There are stocks which now have crashed to, I don't know, 50, 60, 70, 80%, even especially in the small cap segment. If you see a lot of stocks that have crushed now literally to 70, 60%, right? And one side of me says, okay, there is a lot of pressure already on these stocks. Maybe they are bad stocks, right? On the other hand, my mind says, you know what, there could be hidden opportunity in these stocks, because they are down now, valuations have come down. How do I find out those good stocks? And I'm okay to sit down on the stock. It's not like aaj kharida kal becha, wo wala attitude is not there. I'm fine to sit down and just make sure I'm waiting. How do I go and look for some factors to select some stocks or reject some stocks?
So first of all, both might be true, that there might be stocks which are not a bargain, even if they are down 70% or 80%. Because let me remind you that something like 70% plus of the stocks ever listed on the Indian stock exchange, they do not even trade anymore. So they've gone to zero. That's the ratio. So a good number of stocks never come back. So, and especially more so in the small cap space. So the small cap index itself churns 18 to 20% every year. So, one of the numbers which I may have talked about in the last podcast was that the small cap index made a high in 2008. It did not see that. It fell almost 80% from that, 78% to be exact. And it took 8 years to cross that index. But in 8 years, that index has changed. So the stocks that fell never really came back. And this is the story of every bull run, every teji in the market, that the stocks that drive that teji often are not the stocks that drive the next bull run. So that's the nature of the beast, which is not to say, as you said, that there might not be some hidden gems. So when you're looking at stock, even when you're looking at just the financials, first thing is go beyond the profit and loss account. So go to the ratios, go to the balance sheet, go to the cash flows, because that's where things hide. So that's the most important thing. And companies well know that most people do analysis at the level of revenue growth is so much, margin went up or went down, and this is the profit growth, and that's it. So if there's a problem, for instance, most companies will try to keep the revenue up by giving more credit to their buyers or distributors. So earlier you were giving 30 days credit, now you say take 90 days credit, but at least I can put the revenue. So that's how the mindset works. That's how it works. And cash flows is another place where things hide, good or bad. I mean, a big call on Amazon, which people still remember in 2001, was a cash flow call. That first time in the last quarter of 2000, they made huge cash flow. So more than, I think, $230 million. And they said that for the first time, this company is out of the woods. It's not in a danger of going bust. If you look at Tesla today and you look at the capex that they're planning and how much cash flow they're making, you will find that they are not in a good state at all. So that's how you have to look at the cash flows, look at return on capital. So it is not just growth, it is also very important return on capital, which in the euphoria very often people forget. And the market always weights return on capital, return on equity. Even when no one in the market was actually calculating it, even in the 90s, you could see that it could be the most loved stock, and HDFC, not HDFC Bank, but HDFC is an example from that time where I remember we were the first ones to do a negative report saying this stock will not perform. And people said, are you crazy? This is the most loved. And it was the number one pick of every FII. When the FII limit used to be over, there would be people waiting in the wings, limit, and it would be gone the first day. People said, how can a stock which people are waiting to buy not perform? But it did perform because, they had been raising money too frequently and the return had been diluting. So it remained at the same level for 5 years. So that's what happened. Or if you look at the whole infrastructure and engineering construction boom of 2007 to about, I think, 9 or so. And when we went around telling fund at that time, I was on the sell side, so I was telling the funds that, see, the return is diluting, this cannot perform. But it was at that time, there was this euphoria. If India has to do well, this sector has to do well, infrastructure has to do well. So stories don't matter, numbers matter. So look at the numbers. And even if you have very simple criteria that this much return, this much cash flow, this kind of margin is what I require, then at least stick to that criteria. I mean, we look at more factors because now what we have done is we have put our expertise into an artificial intelligence system so that it can be applied on a no bias, no uh, noise, no randomness basis on the entire universe of stocks. But even if your criteria is simple, at least be consistent with that. So even if they're like 5 ratios, at least make sure that you're picking stocks according to that and not according to what you hear on a Telegram group or on television, because that consistency will bring you return. The other thing, the best thing you can do for your portfolio is this: that when you buy a stock, tell yourself, I may be making a mistake, because a good portion of your picks are not going to do what you expected them to. And this is true of every famous fund manager you've heard of, every famous investor you've heard of. So if you look at Warren Buffett, he sells half of what he buys within 6 months, 85% within 2 years. So, nobody has 100% hit rate. Nobody knows the future. So a good percentage of the time, the stock will not do what you expected it to do. So get out then. Always have a stop loss, a trailing stop loss. So let us say, we use a more complex system, but let us say your stop loss is 25%. So it's not 25% from your purchase price. So if you buy at 100, it is not fixed at 75. From 100 goes to 150, goes to 135, goes to 200, goes to 300, retraces to 270. You continue holding, because if you have a price target, you will miss the multi-bagger. So you have to do that balance. But if it goes to 400 and comes back to 300, now it's down 25% from the top, that's when you get out. So risk management is key. So risk management is key on an overall portfolio basis, that you can't be in 100% safe assets like fixed deposits. On the other hand, don't think you can become a day trader in derivatives, in stocks, in crypto, or anything else. So don't be on extreme ends of the risk spectrum. Have a stop loss in equities or any risk asset. Those are the basics. So, people say many times you repeat yourself. I said the good investing advice is not changing every day. It is boring. It is doing the boring stuff right that takes you far, because investing is a loser's game. You have to play not to lose. You don't have to play for the sixers. You have to play not to get out.
No, totally agree about the boring aspect that you said, that if a process works once, right, and then it works twice, thrice, then you just repeat it. That I totally agree. But you talked about numbers, right? Some ratios. For example, you talked about return on equity or return on capital employed, or whichever one that people look at. Now, here is one thing that I find myself into a very tough corner, Devina ji. So there are companies. I'm going to pick some examples just so that we can bring it to some live conversation. Companies like NTPC, okay, their return on equity, if you go and check, might be 10%, 8%, right? But the stock does well. If you look at the price, it's been doing really well, right? On the other hand, there are examples of stocks like Swiggy, Zomato. कोई profitability नहीं है, कोई return on equity नहीं है. But if you look at mutual fund AMCs, they were heavily buying them earlier. And one part of me asked the question here, there are no ratios here to look at right now, at least now. Okay, understand that maybe fund managers are waiting for things to change. They might be thinking 10 years down the line that this company might generate X sales and X profits. And that's why they're betting on it. I understand, but nobody's seen 10 years or 8 years down the line. How do I decide today that when the numbers are not looking good, the ratios are bad? Even then, again, I'm not going to quote it, but for example, veteran investor recently bought a company and it's down in the dumps. Okay, the company, I'm not going to tell the name of the company and the investor, doesn't make any difference to us. But if you look at all the numbers, right, the management has corruption allegations, and not just once, repeatedly. But still, a pro investor, like a fund manager, has picked up that company. And I wonder, is it then something more that I'm missing out personally? And that's what I just wanted to ask you, that is it always sticking to basics of, ROE should be 15% se zyada, and there should be sales growth, there should be profit growth, or there are other things also that we need to look at?
See, we can look at the future, but that's a very risky proposition.
Right.
So if you are doing that kind of thing, which is what, in a sense, venture capitalists do. But then remember, venture capitalists buy 100 companies knowing fully well that 70 will go completely bust. 2025 will give you a kind of okay return your principal, maybe little more. You are playing for those 5 or 10 that will be the sixers. But that works only on a portfolio basis. You can't buy one stock and think that you will hit that sixer. That's a very risky game. And as I said, investing is a loser's game. So, what does a loser's game mean? That you have to play not to lose. Lose is a big hit on your portfolio. So, you don't want a big hit on your entire corpus, because if you come down 50%, you have to double to come to zero. Like I gave you that example of the small cap index falling 80%. It has to then go up 5 times for you to come to zero. So they were like in the 2024 boom, they were these small cap managers that sort of made a comeback and said, last 3 years, I have given 50% compounding. I said, go back, because there was a boom in 2018, 19 also. After that, many of those small cap portfolios were wiped out. They were down 80, 90%. So if you were down 80%, you compound for 50% for 3 years, you're still down 30, 35%. That's your school arithmetic. Don't forget that. So don't, what you're talking about, yes, there might be some winners out of companies which don't have profits. But as you rightly said, who knows what will happen in 8, 10 years. I remember in 2021, when the first round of all these so-called new age company IPOs had come. And I was on a TV channel, and the editor asked me, Devina, if I put a gun to your head, this is November 21, which one would you buy out of these IPOs? I said, none. Even a gun to my head, none of them make sense to me. And one of the arguments which he made was that, right, they look expensive now, but let 4 or 5 years of earnings come in, and then they will start to look less expensive. For most of those companies, the peak margins, the peak profits were pre-IPO. All the margins have come down since, because see, before the IPO, the company goes all out to show great numbers. So they will pull out all stops, including sometimes cutting down on things like discretionary marketing spend to show better numbers, either some profits or less losses. So those are the things. And also, which was something I pointed out back then itself. Nykaa was one of the few companies which actually had profits when going in. And I said, once you do a business model, especially a business model where there are no real entry barriers, then others will come in, which you see now. Now there are like Reliance, Tata's, everybody has beauty brands now, beauty retailing brands. Reliance has just taken over Sephora to make it even bigger. So those, and this is something, interestingly, that I understood good 25 years ago, when Hindustan Lever was entering frozen foods and ice creams and also atta. And while Amul wasn't and still isn't a listed company, I went and spent 2 days with Amul just to understand, the FMCG market better. And we had our own ideas that entry into atta at that stage was not a great idea. But we went to Amul, and I asked the people that, what do you think? Is atta a good market? And they said, we don't think, it will be profitable. But if Levers proves otherwise, that it is a great market, we will also launch. We have the brand, we have the distribution. So you're waiting for somebody else to prove the business model. If it works, you can also enter it. That happens in a lot of businesses. So, all this I say Excel is the best place to tell you fairy tales. So you see all these stories that if it compounds at 25%, the sales and profits, or 20% for the next 15 years, this will be the profit. And then, then the multiple you put on top of that. Nobody is doing any benchmarking that if something grows at 20, 25% every year, what percentage they will be of the industry, even of the GDP. Nothing. It's just a fancy number. And I have given this number in my earlier interviews also, that actually showing any growth at all every year is so difficult. There are more than 4,000 companies trading in India, but showing some profit growth every year, even for 10 years, we found there were only 17 companies. And we've done this exercise many times in the past also. Sometimes there are 25 companies, sometimes there are 27, sometimes there are 22. They're all in this thing. So even 10 years, any profit growth is that difficult. But every research report you pick up for any company, you will see growth every year, growth into the terminal period, and a very nice looking value that you will, or target price that you will come up with. This is all nonsense. So that's why you have to keep checking what is actually happening. For 20 years, any profit growth every year, only HDFC Bank. That's it. I mean, it so happened. I mean, HDFC Bank is a very memorable pick of mine, but back from 96 now, 30 years. But I can't say that I had this 30-year vision that this will be, this outstanding company which will show profit growth every year, which no other company in the country will do. Nobody knows any of what will happen 10, 20, 30 years hence. The companies don't know. I mean, Jeff Bezos did not know the trajectory of Amazon. Aditya Puri didn't know the trajectory of HDFC Bank. Nobody knows. Titan though went through so many ups and downs. The one stock which made so much money for Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, if you read the book on Titan, you will find that 3 times they came close to shutting down the jewelry business.
Right.
That's how checkered the past was. I mean, Apple, same story. So many things which didn't work. I mean, for a 17 years after its IPO, it was at IPO price. 20 years later, it had barely given any returns. Till the iPod became a hit, nothing worked.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating to think about. Um, how long term is a long term? Because is 10 years a long term? Is it 1 year long term? Because in the current environment, it's extremely hard. As you said, competition is kicking in, geopolitics is fast changing ever then, so okay, so got it, understood that, it's
I'd like to add to this that never say that I have high conviction.
right.
For our PMS, one of the big banks we were talking to said, please explain, your top 5 high conviction ideas. And we gave them a 3-page note on why by design we do not have high conviction. We guard against high conviction because high conviction is what? That you have bought into this story, into this narrative, and now you are married to the stock.
Right.
The stocks
Biases.
which given us great returns in the past, Tata Elxsi or Deepak Nitrite or ITC, but doesn't mean we have built up this story that this is this great company and we'll never get out of it. Because when facts change, you get out. So
Acha, okay. Another thing that a lot of people might want to, discuss or get a discussion about is SIPs, right?
right.
Two camps clearly right now, because last 2 years Indian market have not delivered on SIPs. So everybody's saying, no, stop SIPs. It's a scam. Other side of the investors are, continue. SIPs are like this. The nature of SIPs is like this. Where are you
Right.
sitting when it comes to SIPs?
Yeah, I don't think you should. When your brain is panicking, when your brain is asking you this question that should I get out of the market, should I stop my SIPs? I said no, that the sentiment is the contraindicator. And this is research studies, not just in India and US, but wherever in the world, Portugal, Brazil, wherever the study was done, the result was the same. That it is when you're panicking, when there's fear, when there's anxiety, that's when you need to remain in the market. The only time you should actually think of pausing is when money making appears too easy. Like 2024, and this I'm not making it up. These were actual conversations my relationship managers had with family offices, telling them that, our expectations are not unrealistic. We'll be happy with 30% compound. So I said that is unrealistic. But at that time, it appeared that it is the, very easy to do. So at that time, when you're talking caution, when you're talking risk management, people think you are an idiot. I mean, again, I had relationship managers tell me that somebody told them that, your ma'am is nice to listen to, but why are you talking caution? You can't be like Mother Teresa, launch a small cap scheme now. That's what will sell. So that's the thing, that your brain always pushes you in what is probably the wrong direction. And the number which I have quoted often, which now I hear other people also quoting, which is that if you miss out on the 10 best days in 45 odd years, you miss out on 2/3 of the return. So instead of your 100 rupees becoming, let us say, 75,000 rupees, it would have become only 25,000 rupees. If you miss out on the 30 best days, which is less than 1 day a year, you miss out on 90% of the return. And it's the same statistic for S&P. In the S&P in 100 years, if you miss out the 100 best days, you're actually negative. If you start with $100, you're now less than $100. So,
Yeah.
Just grit your teeth. As I said, long-term chart, this beautiful compounding you see, It happens only when you stay there. And as long as the fund you are in is following a process that you believe in, so even in terms of actual fund, do not get into that it is underperforming just now, so let me get out. That's the other thing, because even recently a fund house did this analysis of 5 categories: large cap, small cap, multi cap, etc., across 8 time periods, 8 3-year time periods, so 24 years. And they found that the funds that were in the top quartile, the top 25%, did not remain in the top 25 in the next 3-year period more than 80% of the time. So the style works for a while, it may not work.
Yeah.
So
No. Yeah, no, understood. Totally understood it. So, for a SIP investor, I always say that if you're a SIP investor, you chose to become a SIP investor for a reason, because you may not have time to do any analysis. For example, you don't want to time the market. You have other things to do in your life, and therefore, if you follow that principle, just continue. Okay.
yeah, I mean, the beautiful compounding you see on Excel sheets, very few investors actually see it because they get out at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Even in the US, the best performing fund, I mean, everybody talks of Peter Lynch's book. So the fund compounded some 25-29%, the best performing mass market mutual fund there has been in US history. But a very large number of investors actually made losses on that fund even.
Because they
Because, they got in when the year the performance was very good. The next year the performance was not good at all. They got out.
Yeah.
And like that. So on the average, investors compounded only 7% in a fund. And a large portion of them made no money at all. They lost money in the best performing fund because they entered and exited at the wrong time.
Right.
So
No, that's brilliant. My last question, and then I know I've exceeded the time limit, so I'm just going to ask you one last question, which is Indian IT stocks, IT sector. Um, what is your position on that? Like, I've heard both views. People say, it's not looking good at all. People are saying, no, it's now value versus whatever. So where are you at when it comes to Indian IT stocks, please?
right now, we would be close to market weight, probably a trifle less than that, but around market weight. And I am not the sort who's writing the obituary of the Indian IT sector, because that obituary has been written many times, from Y2K to SaaS, software as a service, digitization, cloud. Everything was supposed to be the death knell of the sector. It didn't happen that way. It might not employ or be an employment generator the way it has been in the last 25 years, which is more a macroeconomic concern for me than an IT services business concern. Because see, no company is going to hand over the keys to the AI. I mean, there was a research paper called Agents of Chaos, and what happens when the agents are running AI. I mean, they're wiping out databases, they're wiping out systems, they're lying to you, they are getting security breach. So obviously, you would still need somebody to intermediate all of that for you. And also with any new technology, while in the beginning it's replacing tasks people are doing, over time the whole canvas changes. The NASSCOM itself expects a J kind of employment curve, that for some time employment will fall and then it will rise again. But I mean, regardless of that, for not recently, for 20 years, I have been very upset with the Indian IT services companies that they have not moved up the value chain, in spite of having cash, in spite of having technically trained human beings. But that apart, on their limited business, I think they will be able to pivot. So, that I'm not like saying this is the end of IT services.
It's not all doom and gloom then. Yeah. Okay. Devinaji, thank you so much for giving me your time. It's always pleasure to speak to you, get some fresh perspective, and also get back to the basics that I tend to forget. There is a basics of investing. So thank you for bringing me back to that. There has to be a global aspect to the investing. It just cannot be relying on one stock market, whatever it is. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's the key takeaway. I mean, that was the wake up call for me from the Asian crisis, and that's how I went global. The other thing is that don't try to optimize your portfolio. Do the boring stuff. Good enough is good enough. It is not, you don't have to get the last multi-bagger in order to have a good portfolio where you can sleep in peace.
No, brilliant. Well advised. Okay. Thank you so much, Devina ji. Thank you for time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. If you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, humble request that you hit the subscribe button now, because your subscription is our motivation. My team and me gets really motivated once we see your subscription. So please hit the subscribe button now, and I'm going to see you very soon. Until then, keep rocking.